What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 119 of the Masterclass. My name is Cam, and I am joined by Dave. What's up?
Good evening. What is up? Life. It just seems like we're both kind of busy, and it's not always easy to find the time to do this, but yet here we are, and I'm glad we're here, and
Agreed.
looking forward to our discussion tonight.
Well, I'm glad you are. We're talking about circumcision yet again.
That's
But I think in a different context than last time.
okay. Yeah.
Anyways, but I'm super tired.
Yeah, I'm there as well.
I want to take a nap, but tomorrow. Oh, you know what is up? I just can't believe I totally didn't lead the show with this. The World Cup is up. Did you watch the opening game or just hear about it at all?
I heard about it. Yes.
I wasn't going to watch it because I'm not necessarily thrilled about either Russia or Saudi Arabia as their soccer teams, because they're just not good. In fact, they're the two lowest ranked teams in the tournament by FIFA.
And then with that said, because Russia pretty much
They won 5-0.
put the hurt on them. So that must mean Saudi Arabia's really bad.
Well, Saudi Arabia looked really good for like the first 8 minutes.
Oh,
And then
out
Russia,
of 90.
Yeah. Russia got an early goal, and it was just game over from then on. And what's funny is they're the two worst teams in their group. So Saudi Arabia not only might not score a goal in the tournament, they're going to give up double-digit goals in 3 games.
Oh, no.
But there's 3 games tomorrow, 2 of which I'm excited for. One is Spain versus Portugal, which is going to be really, 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 really good. So I'm excited about it. It has nothing to do with the show. I love soccer, and the World Cup is like the best thing ever.
So you're saying Russia and Saudi Arabia are that bad, and yet America's
better, not in the tournament, because you qualify by region.
I know.
So it's one of those things where, like, yes, there are worse teams than us in the tournament, but
it's because who we have to play
because
with.
of our region, and because we choked. Like, we've got no excuse. We choked.
Oh.
We don't deserve to be in the World Cup because we lost to teams we should have beaten by 3 goals, and we lost. So that's their issue. It's not, well, they're, better than this team, so they shouldn't get in. It's like, no, it's done by qualifying region, and we happen to be
in
a region that has teams that play against, like, we have a target on our back, right? We're the big
America,
country. Like,
yeah.
it's us and Mexico, and we get everyone's best game because they're the smaller countries that are never going to make the World Cup. And so beating a Mexico or beating the US is a huge win for them. And kudos to them. They did it this time around, and we choked and they won. Yeah. And, good on them. And our guys will sit at home and think about what could have been different.
Mm-hmm. So 2026, it's coming to North America.
Yes.
Canada, United States, and Mexico.
Right. And so
does that just mean they play?
Well, that's also the first year that they're expanding the team to 48, or expanding the World Cup to 48 teams instead of 32, which was an interesting decision. So there's going to be 80 games at the 2026 World Cup. 60 of them will be in the US, 10 will be in Canada, 10 will be in Mexico. And Canada and Mexico will only get group stage games. And maybe the first round. Yeah. Because the quarterfinals, the semifinals, and the finals are all US. So, but yeah. And what's weird about there's like 23 bid cities, and only 16 will wind up hosting games. Kansas City's one of them. But Canada's 3 bid cities are Montreal and Toronto, which makes sense. And the third one is Edmonton, not Vancouver, which I find incredibly interesting. And then Mexico's is Monterrey, Guadalajara, and Mexico City. If you're interested, I just read a big article about it, so it's all fresh information.
And when will we know if Kansas City actually gets?
They didn't say. To the best of my knowledge, they didn't say when they're going to make the decisions. They will make them sooner than later so that they have the most time to prepare. But I mean, if it's in Kansas City, it's going to be at Arrowhead,
right?
because that's the biggest stadium in the city. You can fit the most people in. So if it's here, that's where the game will be.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I don't think Detroit's a bid city, even though in 1994 it did host a game at the Pontiac Silverdome.
Cool.
My grandparents got me a yellow card. They went to one of the games at the Silverdome. They told me it was used in a game. I believed him as a kid.
Now, not so much. I don't
really think it was, but I still have it.
That's funny.
24 years later?
Yeah.
I still have it. So I thought that was the coolest thing.
24. You're right.
Yeah. It's 2018, right?
Yeah. I forgot what year it was.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was, sorry. It gets me pumped. I've been talking to everyone at work about it all day today. Like, how you doing? Like, great. How are you? Yeah. Well, it's the World Cup. Again, like, that's soccer, right?
Oh, no.
That hurts me on the inside. All right. We're on a time crunch.
We're good.
Enough of my yammering. So I think we're going to pick up kind of sort of where we left off last time. We're going to start in verse 9 of chapter 4 and probably just get through 12. I think that's.
Yeah. That works.
Yeah, because we got some stuff to discuss. Now, David, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to read these 3 verses without messing up.
All right. I don't have my glasses, so I have to hold it way out here.
See, I say that. It makes it sound like you make mistakes all the time. You don't. 1, and if you did, 2, it doesn't matter. But just last episode was so funny how we talked about it, and then Abraham had to get an adjustment or something, go to the chiropractor. Anyways.
All right.
You go. I'm done.
So Romans 4, 9 through 12. Here we go. Is this blessing then only for the circumcised or also for the uncircumcised? For we say that faith was counted to Abraham as righteousness. How then was it counted to him? Was it before or after he had been circumcised? It was not after, but before he was circumcised. He received the sign of circumcision as a seal of the righteousness that he had by faith while he was still uncircumcised. The purpose was to make him the father of all who believe without being circumcised, so that righteousness would be counted to them as well, and to make him the father of the circumcised, who are not merely circumcised, but who also walk in the footsteps of the faith that our father Abraham had before he was circumcised.
All right. So we've discussed this before. Rather in depth. I think we said circumcised like upwards of 60 times that episode. And I'm pretty sure we mentioned it in that episode, but just to, I think, clarify in case we didn't, or to remind those that don't remember, I can't know why I can't talk tonight. This is really frustrating. My brain is not working. Anyways, there was a big debate in this time in the church about whether or not the Gentiles that had become Christians needed to be circumcised like their Jewish counterparts. Circumcision was a big part of, the Jewish culture, the ritual, sort of nature that they had. And so there was a big debate among the church leaders. Do they need to become circumcised like the Jews and adopt other Jewish traditions in order to be part of, this new thing called Christianity? And so if you read through Acts and some of Paul's other letters, you can see Acts, you see the story, and then multiple times there's, confrontations or discussions about it. And then in other books, you can hear see some of the resolutions. But essentially, as Paul states here, the circumcision is an outward deal that reflects an inward change. And so he makes an argument here that the Gentiles essentially don't need to be circumcised because Abraham, his faith was counted to him as righteousness before he was circumcised. So the circumcision had nothing to do with it. It was a representation of what had happened already. And so he also draws on the righteousness was counted to him as faith while he was uncircumcised, which makes him the father of those who are uncircumcised in the faith. But then he became circumcised, which also makes him the father of all of the circumcised people in the faith. So he's making a big claim about Abraham. backing up sort of what, the Old Testament says about him and what God makes, the promise to him that, your descendants are going to be like, I think he says the sand on the seashore or something like that numerous. And that being, a Christian or, believing in Jesus as the Son of God, being part of God's kingdom makes you one of those people in Abraham's family, whether or not you're circumcised or uncircumcised. So that's sort of the frame that this thing sits in as far as I can tell.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly I could be wrong, but that's sort of the context I think we're dealing with here. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Good, because I'm out of breath.
So yeah, very much this outward sign. But even with that, it was clearly something that God wanted of Abraham at the time that Abraham did it, because it wasn't just him, but it was
like his whole
household, including servants. And
could you imagine that family dinner?
No.
All right, ladies, I'm gonna need you to leave the room. Us men got to talk about manly things.
Yeah.
So, dudes, here's the deal.
Exactly.
We're all gonna go get some knives. And I can't even say it. Like, just imagine how that conversation went. Excuse me? Like, hopefully they weren't eating sausage or anything, tube shaped.
So, yeah.
Sorry, that was a craft joke.
But even in that, it does sort of like, why of all things, why was that what was chosen as?
Yeah, seriously. I don't know. I don't know.
No, I know. I don't either. But it's just an odd. And I'm thinking of just different stories of, King David being required to gather X number of foreskins from the Philistines, and he goes out and gets twice as many. And
I mean, that's, I guess, what the precursor to scalping.
I mean, yeah, exactly. Because it's.
Well, I mean, okay, so you think about it, like, it's obviously something that's very personal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, the act itself might not be intimate, but it's, on the part of your body that is used for intimacy in, one way. It's painful. And I don't know. I'm trying just to think logically about.
But even he received the sign of circumcision as a seal of the righteousness that he had by faith. I mean, again, I don't mean to be crass or crude about this, but there's sort of what kind of sign is that it's like, well, prove it. Prove to me that you're circumcised,
Yeah.
Because for that to be quote unquote, a sign, received the sign, then it has to be visible, or you have to be willing to show it, and that again, it kind of comes back to what you're talking about in terms of it's private. There's an intimacy. But yeah, it seems like there would have to be some expectation of you have to prove this. No? Or is it, if you say you are, then you are, and if you say you're not, then you're not? Or
well, yeah, I mean, I guess it could get that petty, when you get like pharisaical about it. Well, why don't you just, prove to me that you're circumcised or whatever?
Because was it just the day and the age where you said, you were honest about it, like you just didn't lie about those kinds of things?
Yeah. But I also think too, is like, just because it's a sign doesn't necessarily mean that it's meant for public knowledge.
Yeah. Okay.
Trying to think what else. Like, if you have a tattoo that's meaningful and representative, and it's a sign of, a memory or the love you have for someone, but it's somewhere that's always covered, that doesn't mean that it didn't happen, that it's not there, but the sign is for you to remember the
significance to you with it.
So that's kind of my thought on it. But yeah, it is like, to your point, why that? You know, I don't know. I don't know. So, all right. Yeah, I mean, Paul's argument here is it almost seems self-explanatory to me.
Well, yeah.
That's
of all the Paul things that we deal with, this is pretty.
This one's like A leads to B, B leads to C, C leads to D. There's your answer. Okay, let's move on. But is it? I mean, I'm trying to think what would be a modern equivalent to the sort of argument that's happening here between the circumcised and the uncircumcised. Like, you've got certain groups of Pentecostals that say unless you speak in tongues, you're not a true believer, or some sort of variant of if you are a true believer, then you will speak in tongues. I don't think that one's as popular or as common of an argument, but it's a similar. In order for us to believe that you are, then you need to do something that we say you need to do. I'm trying to think if there's any other similar comparisons that we can think of besides that one. Baptism, maybe you need to be baptized.
Yeah.
That one's obviously a lot more broad than just the speaking in tongues one, which this was obviously very broad because it was like A or B.
Yeah. You either are or you aren't. And you really, much like even with the baptism example, I know there's sort of this, like, should I get baptized again? Or
I got baptized twice.
Well, again, but you can't get circumcised twice. At least I don't think you should be circumcised twice.
Yeah,
so,
no.
So there's definitely a.
I don't know. All right. So he received the sign of circumcision as a seal of the righteousness that he had by faith while he was still uncircumcised. The purpose was to make him the father of all who believe without being circumcised, so that righteousness would be counted to them as well. So here's what one of the, how do I even want to say this? Paul at times can be very, very good at explaining a huge revelation in very, very simple terms. Abraham is a huge figure in the redemptive history of mankind, right? He is the father of all the Jews. He is the person and the head of the family that God chose to start his people through, right? Very, very important from the standpoint of history of our faith, of the Jewish faith. So what, 60% of the religious people on the planet are Christians or Jews, or even higher, maybe? I don't really know how big Islam and Buddhism are, because those are the two big ones. There's a lot of others, obviously, but I'm thinking of the main religions. I would think that Christianity and Judaism is probably half, if not a little more. I know Islam is very, 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 very large. I'm just throwing numbers out there. Anyways, that was a really bad way of saying, yeah, Abraham's an important dude. And so for Paul, in 3 verses, and even more specifically in 1 verse, says that he received the sign of circumcision as a seal before he was uncircumcised. The purpose of this was to make him the father of all who believe without being circumcised, so that righteousness would be counted to them as well. And then in verse 12, and to make him the father of the circumcised, who are not merely circumcised, but who also walk in the footsteps of the faith that our father Abraham had before he was circumcised. So, like, in one fell swoop, the end point of Paul's argument is, oh yeah, the reason why this happened was so that Abraham could be the father of both the circumcised Jews and the uncircumcised Gentiles. As long as they believe and become part of the family, they get to join his lineage as part of God's people. Which is nuts if you think about it.
Oh, yeah.
That God is so clever and so, you say his forethought, but if he does exist out of time, it isn't forethought, it's just thought. and it happens to work itself out in time. And I need to get someone really smart on this show that's not you or, well, that's smarter than us.
Yes.
To talk about that whole time thing, because that's fun and also very painful to think about. But that God would ordain it in such a way that he could pick a dude thousands of years ago, and say, I'm going to build my family through you, and then set it up so that through this one guy, he can bring two vastly different people groups, in the sense of just like labels, not, cultures and anything. Oh, I cannot talk today. Do you get what I'm trying to say? Because I feel like I sound like an idiot right now. I'm really sorry. It seems like if you look at this thing with Abraham, and then you look at what he did with Jesus, comes from the backwoods, essentially, not important, and then does the most unthinkable thing ever, sacrifices his own son to bring in, to kind of finalize what he started through Abraham, to finalize the debt that needed to be paid, to erase the sin, to bring in all of those uncircumcised people that have been waiting, to be with God. And then, so, what he starts with Abraham, he finishes with Jesus. And we get these two really, really like, kind of like pillars in the story, the beginning and the end. And you just see two very interesting ways that, God set it up over here with Abraham, and then he finished it over here with Jesus. And all of a sudden, Paul's able to connect those dots. And the Jews can't ignore him because of the position that Abraham holds. And they can't ignore Jesus because they're all believers now. And so he kind of takes these two pillars and says, yeah, ipso facto, boom, we're good. Like they don't have to be circumcised if they don't want to.
Right.
Which should theoretically have nipped that whole argument in the bud, but I think it's still an issue.
Yeah, and that's so. As you were saying that, what's going through my head is something we know very well, that something different happens with the Messiah, with Jesus, and he came to fulfill the law, not to abolish the law. But like, circumcision was clearly important. It clearly mattered. Because when the Jews were wandering in the desert for 40 years, those that were born in the desert, I don't think were circumcised. And then Joshua takes over after Moses. And they're at this point of like recommitting themselves to God and being in the promised land. And God's like, all those that weren't circumcised in the desert now have to be circumcised. And I get that there's this outward sign, and I even get that as we're reading in Romans that, this is Abraham's righteousness that existed before the circumcision and after the circumcision. And I don't even know that I'm doing what I'm trying to say, because justice. But I guess what it boils down to, and this is maybe where I'll just land, is circumcision was clearly very important. And it had its purpose. To a certain degree, I don't comprehend, I don't get. And again, I'm going to chalk it up a little bit to that God does thing. God is a big God and has his ways and his reasons, and we don't always understand that. What is it about the Messiah, about Jesus and him dying on the cross, that negates the outward sign of being circumcised. And I mean, like, I know it.
Well,
and it seems kind of like what you were saying of, A and B, and it points to this. But I guess there's part of me that, like, I'm kind of like, it just seems odd that it is not important now to a certain extent.
But it's not the only thing that became less important once Jesus died.
Sure.
The whole sacrificial system,
exactly,
which was an enormous part of the Jewish life. The temple became less important, which was like the center of all things Jewish back then, right? The curtain, is torn.
Mm-hmm.
Like when Jesus dies and resurrects, it completely, like, fundamentally shifts everything. So for circumcision to become less of an important thing is not surprising, because so many other things that were important beforehand were no longer important, because, as we've said before, and as I think, we're correct in believing based on scripture, like, the purpose of the law was not salvation. The purpose of the law was to show the depravity of sin and the perfection that God requires. And so all of that stuff that was being done was carrying out the law in a way to show, our position before God.
Mm-hmm.
And when Jesus fulfills all that, well, then none of that's required anymore, because, as you said, he didn't abolish the law, he fulfilled it. And so when you're, like, this is a really stupid example. No, never mind. It was sorry. The more I thought about it, the less and less it made sense. But like, yeah, when you're done, when you've met the rules, or when the rules or the debt, or, okay, there's a good one. The debt, right? That's a pretty common analogy when talking about this, is that the debt has been paid. The bank no longer cares, right?
Mm-hmm.
You owe them nothing. You have held up your end of the deal. They got what was determined they needed to get, and you both go on your merry ways, right? You don't have to make the monthly payments.
Right.
You're not under threat of your collateral being taken if you can't make those payments. You're not accruing any more interest. Any of the penalties for defaulting on whatever the loan is all go away. And in the same way, that's what happens when Jesus fulfills the debt, right? God is no longer interested in us doing ritualistic sacrifice, because he doesn't, like, the issue's gone. Like, we can move on now.
Right.
That's how I see it. I don't know.
And so, but I guess that's like all those kinds of things. I feel like I can kind of go, okay, I see what the issue was.
Oh, okay.
Whereas with circumcision, I don't totally see what, like, I get why we don't do sacrifice anymore. And even again, back to what you were talking about this being, because it says the purpose was to make him the father of all who believe without being circumcised. And that's just like even the fact that Paul gets this and knows this. I mean, the Holy Spirit is involved clearly, but I this is truly another one of those topics, I guess, for me that I'm a little bit dumbfounded by it. Like, it just does not. It makes sense, but it doesn't make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's okay. I mean, that's, I don't, because ultimately the issue, as we'll talk about in the following verses that we won't get to tonight, is that, it is about faith. And so, was there an element of faith that was expressed through circumcision that is no longer, and I may be stretching here and trying to look for something that's just not there. But I just a real sense of this is part of God's plan. And even when he's having, and maybe this is kind of what I guess it's part of God's plan. And that even as he is having Abraham be circumcised and circumcise everybody in his household, there is this, if we're talking in the realm of time, this futuristic people, us, that will exist that fall under that category of being uncircumcised. And there's this connection of Abraham and his faith and his obedience and circumcision lends to this linear future believers being uncircumcised, and there being a connection between the two, and him being the father of the other. That, again, I can't quite grasp my head around. And maybe if one of our listeners is smarter in this topic or has done some research, I think it would be interesting to hear from them. But yeah.
So I had one thought while you were talking. Maybe it was about commitment.
I would agree.
Because, like, say, for example, you want to, I don't know, be a Kansas City Royals fan. And the way to get into the fan club is to circumcise yourself. I'm not doing that for a baseball team.
Right.
Especially the Royals. But, like, in order to be one of God's people, you had to do this. And I wonder if part of it was just like, these are the stakes. I don't want any half-hearted, lukewarm, complacent, warm bodies in the seats. Like, I want committed people that are willing to do what I require of them, even if, 1, it's hard, 2, it requires personal sacrifice, and 3, it might not make a whole lot of sense.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
And maybe that's part of it. Because I'm not doing that to my body for, I mean, it wasn't my choice. It was well,
and that's it. And you don't really have any recollection of it at all.
Thank God. But yes, I mean, maybe that's what it is. But but think about, most of the times you hear about it, when it's a big deal, it's all grown men doing it.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
That's a personal choice, right?
Well, and even doing it to your child, there is an element of, this doesn't seem like a normal thing to do. So,
yeah. Like, it's one of those, if it wasn't Christian, you'd be like, oh, that's some really weird ritualistic.
Well, and that's,
oh my gosh. Mutilation. There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's very much part of our culture, and now it's done for health reasons, is what they say. And then even in that, there's like debate, just like there is with any topic. But so
another episode on circumcision.
Yes. Well, and then even in that, we adopted our son when he was 5, almost 6, and was uncircumcised. And
well, good thing Abraham's got him covered.
We did have him circumcised, and it wasn't a health thing. It was, he's different enough as it is. Do we want him to have that too? And ultimately, there was enough medical stuff for him that it ended up being all part of a one-time being out, dealing with a hernia and things like that, that he didn't just have that procedure done. It was done while other things were being done. So anyway,
poor guy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think in order to honor our time commitments, we are going to come to a crashing end there real quick, but
well, and next time we'll talk more. Faith is the topic that will be, which you can't talk about Abraham and not have a discussion about faith. So
absolutely. So we will get to that next episode, which will be episode 120. And that's exciting. Yeah, you can yell at us on Twitter. Dave is at David J. Hogue, unless you changed it again.
No.
Okay, still. He's at David J. Hogue. I'm at Cam Brennan. You can email us hello@supermegacorp.net. You can get the show notes at supermegacorp.net/masterclass/119. And all those links to all that stuff in our Patreon page. And I don't know, maybe a stupid GIF I'll put in the show notes this time if I remember. You can all find them in the show notes. They're also in your podcast app of choice. Thank you to Katie, Rachel, and Wilby.
Yes, thank you.
And we will see you next time.
Bye.
Toodles.